Welcome to the Darkstream. Voxday, voxday.blogspot.com, and Unauthorized TV. So I read an interesting study today. In fact, Space Bunny actually sent it to me. And it was about the way that negativity and a negative outlook is actually akin to methodically poisoning your own mind. And it's interesting when you think about the people in your life who are consistently negative. The kind of people who are always predicting failure and doom. Anytime somebody has a positive idea, they want to shoot it down. Anytime somebody is starting on a new relationship, they feel the need to be skeptical about it. They always want to offer you criticism whenever you're doing something new. And, these people can be really exhausting. And I'm not talking about, the ankle biters and the gammas specifically here. They obviously exhibit a extreme form of this behavior. But I'm talking about the kind of people that are just reliably negative about life in general. And what's interesting is that apparently the more you are negative, the more that you are unable to feel or think in a positive manner. And apparently there's two reasons for this. Number one is some sort of chemical or hormone called cortisol. And this is a little bit hard to believe, but according to the this PhD psychologist and senior fellow of the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley, a gentleman by the name of Dr. Rick Hansen, he says people who routinely experience chronic stress, particularly acute, even traumatic stress, release the hormone cortisol, which literally eats away, almost like an acid bath, at the hippocampus, which is a part of the brain that's very engaged in visual spatial memory as well as memory for context and setting. And so you can see where that has an effect on people who are subjected to trauma. They talk about post-traumatic stress disorder and so forth. And I think that that's mostly what they were talking about with regards to cortisol. But the thing is that if you stress yourself, if you subject yourself to this constant negativity, if you're constantly stressing yourself through your negative thought processes, you're essentially replicating over a period of time what trauma normally inflicts upon people. And this is a really bad thing. This is why it's important not to allow yourself to get caught up in those black pills or whatever you want to call it. In fact, this article, which is actually called How Complaining Physically Rewires Your Brain to Be Anxious and Depressed. It says negative thinking reinforces neural pathways associated with that emotion, eventually making it an automatic reaction. The same can be said of any repetitive thought or action. So what they're saying is that this self-imposed stress, this self-imposed negativity becomes a habit. Just like any other habit, you can have good habits and you can have bad habits. And negative thinking is literally a bad habit that you can create. And that's why it's so, you've probably seen this. People get obsessed with a negative idea, whether it's a crazy idea about their wife cheating on them, or that their husband is doing something wrong. And they can't let it go. And the more they think about it, the more they become unable to think about anything else. And so, that's why I think it's so important to allow yourself to bask in those moments of joy. It's important to focus on those feelings and thoughts of hope. This is probably why Christians are reliably reported to be happier and mentally healthier than most non-Christians. It's specifically because of the hope that Christianity provides through its concepts of forgiveness, redemption, and salvation. You're not tormented over time by guilt and shame when you believe that you're forgiven. You're not dwelling on the self-inflicted injuries of the past if you believe that Jesus, God, are willing to forgive you because you have repented. That's why I think it's I think when you look at the way they talk about the martyrs going to their deaths singing and so forth, I mean the level of hope that necessarily entails, the level of joy that necessarily entails. I mean, how positive are the neural pathways in those people's minds? You can call it delusion if you want to, but what a positive delusion that must have been, if you step back and think about it a bit. Now, the interesting thing is it's pretty clear that one thing that goes into the negative male pattern of behavior that we describe as the gamma pattern is that it's pretty clear that they have some fairly strongly developed negative neural pathways. What I find fascinating about reading the literature of the past is seeing how many, if not most, of the great writers of the past have noticed this behavioral pattern. They didn't call it gamma. They didn't necessarily come up with the sociosexual hierarchy in the systematic way that I have, but they've clearly identified a very similar concept. And it was actually just today that I was reading A Man in Full by Tom Wolfe. And what was interesting was that Nietzsche actually came up with the concept. Now, I'd always kind of considered Nietzsche to be a bit of a gamma himself. But perhaps that's why he was able to write so intelligently about this. Now, check this out. This is from A Man in Full by Tom Wolfe. And this lawyer is speaking, a black lawyer by the name of Roger White. And he says, Nietzsche once said that resentment is the least explored of the primary human motivations. He said there are certain types of people who can't improve their own place in the world, and so they devote all their energies to tearing down others. He called them the tarantulas. And so I was interested because I read, it's actually from chapter 29 in Also sprach Zarathustra, or So sprach Zarathustra, which I read in German about 30-something years ago. I don't think that I hadn't read Zarathustra again much. I think I'd read part of it back in 2008 or so. But I didn't remember the bit about the tarantulas. And so I went and read it, and I want to read you a passage from it because I think that it's really intriguing that summary that Tom Wolfe gave is very accurate and possibly more useful. But it's interesting to see Nietzsche's perspective given the way that he's describing this in his customarily pompous and exaggerated way. So this is from chapter 29, The Tarantula. Lo, this is the tarantula's den. Wouldst thou see the tarantula itself? Here hangeth its web. Touch this, so that it may tremble. There cometh the tarantula willingly. Welcome, tarantula. Black on thy back is thy triangle and symbol, and I also know what is in thy soul. Revenge is in thy soul. Wherever thou bitest, there ariseth black scab. With revenge, thy poison makes the soul giddy. Thus do I speak unto you in parable, ye who make the soul giddy, ye preachers of equality. Tarantulas are ye unto me, and secretly revengeful ones. Interesting. Secret. Who's that? What's that remind you of? But I will soon bring your hiding places to the light. Therefore do I laugh in your face my laughter of the height. Therefore do I tear at your web, that your rage may lure you out of your den of lies, and that your revenge may leap forth from behind your word justice. Because for men to be redeemed from revenge, that is for me the bridge to the highest hope and a rainbow after long storms. Otherwise, however, would the tarantula's habit. Let it be very justice for the world to become full of the storms of our vengeance. Thus do they talk to one another. Vengeance will we use and insult against all who are not like us. Thus do the tarantula hearts pledge themselves. And will to equality, that itself shall henceforth be the name of virtue, and against all that hath power will we raise an outcry. Ye preachers of equality, the tyrant frenzy of impotence crieth thus in you for equality. Your most secret tyrant longings disguise themselves thus in virtue words. Fretted conceit and suppressed envy, perhaps your father's conceit and envy, in you they break forth as flame and frenzy of vengeance. What the Father hath hid cometh out in the Son, and oft have I found in the Son the Father's revealed secret. Inspired ones they resemble, but it is not the heart that inspireth them, but vengeance. And when they become subtle and cold, it is not spirit, but envy that maketh them so. Their jealousy leadeth them also into thinkers' paths, and this is the sign of their jealousy. They always go too far, so that their fatigue hath at last to go to sleep on the snow. In all their lamentations soundeth vengeance. In all their eulogies is maleficence, and being judged seemeth to them bliss. But thus do I counsel you, my friends, distrust all in whom the impulse to punish is powerful. Now, what's really astonishing about that is how many of the base descriptions of the core characteristic of the gamma is contained in that single passage. He talks about secret tyrant longings and tyrant frenzy. He's talking about secret kings. He talks about the way in which virtue words. He's talking about virtue signaling there. You may note that I've talked about the way that gammas tend to be dorks and nerds, and they tend to be a little bit more intelligent than the average. Their jealousy leadeth them also into thinkers' paths. They always go too far. He's talking about their social cluelessness. And the key thing is he talks about vengeance, revenge. They're motivated. Their core motivation is to get revenge for their social failures of their youth, of their formative youth. Vengeance will we use and insult against all who are not like us. I mean, doesn't that sound exactly like the people that have been trying to pester Owen and I? I should say Owen and me, to be more grammatical. But what's interesting, the connection that Nietzsche makes that I really did not, is the connection to equality. What he's talking about here is he's making a connection to the link that many have observed between the SJW and the gamma. This is why gammas tend to, or why SJWs tend to be predominantly gammas, the SJW men. Because the core root of equality is envy and the desire to destroy and punish. And we see that all the time. We see that in all the anti-whiteness stuff, the anti-white privilege stuff, the anti-male stuff, the anti-Christian stuff. It's all about envy, vengeance, and destruction. They are the tarantulas. And, you know, it's hard, I think, for people to deny the reality of these observations, the legitimacy of these observations, when you consider the fact that so many different people, you know, I have nothing in common with Friedrich Nietzsche. We're separated in almost every way. I'm a Christian, he was not. He lived in the 19th century, I'm in the 21st century, and so forth. And yet, simply by observing the patterns of human behavior around us, we've come up with much the same conclusions. And we're very, very far from the only writers to have done so. And so, you know, if you're skeptical about the reality and the legitimacy of the sociosexual hierarchy, I really think that you should look very seriously at some of these various writers who talk about the subject, maybe not quite as explicitly as I have or as Nietzsche has, but it is real, and it is something that you can use to your advantage, both in understanding other people's behavior, in anticipating other people's behavior, and also in addressing your own behavior and controlling yourself and understanding, you know, what's really motivating me. Why am I drawn to behave in this negative manner? Because, to return to the earlier subject, you're poisoning your mind and you're removing your own capacity for happiness and joy by seeking to impose your secret tyrant longings and seeking to enact vengeance because you feel less than equal to somebody else. And so, you know, fretted conceit and suppressed envy, as he describes it. You know, and it's not about what other people think. You know, this is the fundamental error, I think, of the gamma, is the concern for what other people think. It's not about what they think about you. It's about what is actually mentally healthy for you. And so, you know, if you're behaving in a way that is carving these negative neural pathways, if you're drenching your hippocampus in cortisol, the outcome is not going to be good for you. And it doesn't matter what anybody else does. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. If you do those things, there will be negative consequences, material negative consequences for you and for your mind. So, you know, if you're somebody who finds yourself regularly drawn to those negative pathways, perhaps understanding why it's happening and the process that is playing out, like the article said, the good news is that the reverse can be accomplished. You can intentionally start carving out positive pathways, and the more that you do that, the easier it will become. So, that's my advice. Don't poison your mind. Learn to focus on the joy. Learn to focus on the hope. Learn to focus on the positivity. I'm not talking about constructing any sort of delusion bubble, but one of the things that people have often asked me is, they say, you make all these terrible predictions about war and societal collapse, and you talk about the cycles of history and how we've been through some of the best and easiest times ever recorded, and so everything is going to be downhill from here and so forth. Why do you seem so optimistic personally? How can you be so positive personally? And it's because the macro is not the micro. The fact that the world is not going to be a utopia does not mean that your life or my life is necessarily going to be terrible. In all of the very worst times in human history, with the possible exception of Noah's flood, no negative event has ever affected everybody on the planet. And whatever happens, even if the whole world devolves into World War III, there are still going to be places and moments of happiness and joy and peace. So, does that mean that you're going to be in the right place at the right time? Not necessarily, but the only way to increase your chances of being in the right place at the right time is to pay attention to the events without letting them poison your mind. So don't poison your mind. Carve out positive neural pathways. That's my advice anyhow. This is the Darkstream. I'm Voxday.